Good morning, Chris. How are you?
Good morning, Richard. I'm doing well. The Miami AI Club had this amazing private dinner last night. And so I had
Yeah.
an opportunity to head down. It's an organization co founded by Sarah and Nima Shea. And basically, it's community in Miami around AI. And that's something that I love. I think community is everything. And if you're in the Miami area, if you're interested in AI, last night we had around 23 people in different verticals. We had people in healthcare, people at JP Morgan Chase, people at GoDaddy. We had VCs, we had startups, and we were talking about AI and security. And it was just a really
Mhm.
nice atmosphere. I can't tell you how different it feels from a traditional conference, but to get people together to talk about AI, it was brilliant. So if you're in the Miami area, you're interested in AI, I want to invite you to apply to one of these events. They are obviously limited access, invite only, but if you can get in, it's an amazing opportunity.
Awesome. Yeah. Miami was also really big at creating the crypto community. And I think that, they're just community minded. Miami is one of those interesting places where it's a little underrated as how should we say, as a community because it kind of feels a little bit like vacation every time you go there.
Yeah.
But they're really good at getting out there and connecting with people.
Yeah.
That's actually probably the best thing about Miami.
I love that.
Um,
How was
we
your
we
week?
have a lot of my week was good. I'm particularly interested in seeing or talking today about the results that we've started to see from NVIDIA specifically, but also on the back of some of the other companies. The old gray man in me is starting to have his, you know, concerns about the hype cycle and the
Yeah.
bubble that we're potentially or definitely in. Um, yeah, so I've been thinking a little bit about that. I also noticed that a lot of big conferences, especially in the generative AI space, have started to consolidate their talks, their speakers around AI and around the platforms that can support that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've been talking to a lot of leaders about what that looks like. Config is coming up in June. This is the
Hmm.
big Figma conference. Their first day is pretty much AI. Second day is all design systems platform. So yeah, there's a lot to talk about in the generative AI space as well. But why don't we just quickly do a brief overview of the week? Microsoft Build happened. I know that you've got some perspective on how that compares to some of the other events we saw last week from Google and of course OpenAI.
Last week we had Google I/O. We had OpenAI's Spring Updates event. This week was all about Microsoft and Microsoft Build. It started out with their new Copilot Plus PCs on Monday. And on Tuesday, the main keynote, you had Satya. And more importantly, I think you had Kevin Scott, their CTO. And I think he is such a great advocate for the company. He has this relaxed, just decorum when he goes on stage and he's just talking. And he went out there, he had guests in the crowd like Devin. He spoke just about the vision that Microsoft has for AI, the investments that they have made. And I was like, man, that was just perfect. And so I
Mm.
think their event was really more cohesive than what we have seen from other players. But some of their big announcements that I am excited about, they spoke about their 5.3 family of models. And so if you think about AI models, we talk about large language models, and these are massive models that require massive infrastructure for you to run them. You can't run them locally on a device, especially like a phone or a watch or a computer. So Microsoft has been working on what we call small language models. And these are models typically below 20 billion parameters, but I tend to try to keep them below 10 billion if possible. And they have some really small models that can run locally. So it means that it's going to be private. You're not going to a cloud to send data up to some unknown entity or even a trusted
Mhm.
entity. It's right on your device. And they also announced Phi Silica, which is specific to the devices that they're putting out today. So really amazing performance and capabilities on these models that they're able
Mhm.
to accomplish. And the idea is that for things that you can do locally, you will be able to do locally. And for things that you need to go to the bigger models for, you'll be able to do that. They spoke about Copilot teams and all the changes that are happening around Team Copilot. They spoke about Khan Academy. They have this really amazing partnership with Khan Academy where they're going to be providing the infrastructure for Canmigo, which is Khan Academy's tutoring assistant for kids. And they're
Right.
also going to have Canmigo for teachers. And they announced that every teacher in the US, K through 12, will have free access to Canmigo for teachers. And That to me is perfect. Like that's how you invest back into the community. Because I do think teachers need to be educated on the technology. They need to get exposed to it so that they can figure out how this can be applied properly in the
Right.
classroom, but they can also point out the bugs and they can say this works and this doesn't work. In terms of acquisitions, you had some big announcements from OpenAI. They now have a partnership with News Corp. Scale
Saw that.
raised $1 billion in their Series F. Sooner raised 125 million. Autodesk acquired the Wonder Studios, an amazing VFX company. So overall, a very busy week for AI, and I can't wait to dive in. But I want to just kind of frame today's conversation in two parts. I'd love to spend the first part talking about Microsoft Build, and specifically, if you're a developer, if you're a business, how do we compare like what Microsoft is offering as an ecosystem versus Google and potentially Apple? And I just want to spend some time talking about that first, and then I want us to dive into the money in AI story because, as you mentioned,
Mm.
NVIDIA had a blockbuster week, and we can't ignore the numbers that are coming out now.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about Microsoft. I know you're very bullish on Microsoft. They tend to have um, kind of surprised some people in the sense that because they are not necessarily considered to be the most innovative company in the world, they were maybe undervalued or um, not given the kind of attention that they should have had. But what they have is something we've discussed in this series before, and that is this significant installed base of enterprise and corporate users. And
Mm-hmm.
what that means is when they release new product and advances to product, they're immediately making it available to a huge group of people who are using this type of technology in their day-to-day work in their productivity. So it's not just the pie in the sky stuff where we see like, oh, you can make a movie in 4 minutes, but rather this is how to make your job easier. I was actually working with one of my peers at one of the companies that I advised with yesterday, and we were building the structure for this new kind of go-to-market strategy that we're developing. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if we would have been able to achieve this with the limited resources we have. So we're a small team, we're punching above our weight, but
Mm-hmm.
using ChatGPT and some of the other tools that are available, we're actually able to get there a lot quicker. And I think what we're saying about Microsoft is they're coming up with really cool innovations, but at the same time, they're also delivering those innovations into the day-to-day product, into your spreadsheets, into your word
Yeah.
processing. And the idea of this Copilot is very, very powerful. If you look at what GitHub did with their Copilot,
Mm-hmm.
now you're seeing the same thing happen in the desktop environment, which is, hey, I'm able to actually get work done faster, more effectively in real time. It's not like, oh, this is the promise that's going to happen in 6 months or 10 years down the line. It's actually happening right now with Microsoft.
Yes, 100%, Richard. So here's my statement, right? With Copilot, Microsoft has created the best platform for developers, especially enterprises that are looking to build AI products and intelligent solutions, period. And notice I said with Copilot, because I do think
Mm,
Copilot is Microsoft's new platform. And it's interesting because it needs to span both devices like your personal computing devices, your phones and your
mm-hmm,
computer, but it also needs to reach to the cloud and it needs to reach to what you're doing for work and your personal life. And so let's kind of step back and break it down. The three big players that you have right now, we have Google and we have Apple, we have Microsoft. So we have already
mm,
had Google I/O and we have now had Microsoft Build. Now, Google, I think, is great because they have their models like Gemini and they have the hyperscale infrastructure. Apple has the consumer devices and they have their operating systems like iOS, macOS, and iPadOS. So Google had Google I/O. They released amazing products, right? We saw Gemini, we saw Gemma, their small language model. We saw Learn LM, which is a model that's optimized for education. And of course, we see them bringing these capabilities into things like Google Workspace and Google Cloud and
yeah.
their Pixel devices. And it's robust. But the challenge that Google has is that they don't have a serious PC contender. They have the Chromebooks, but that just doesn't cut it, especially when it comes to AI. You're going to end up having to run too much in the cloud and not take advantage of the bare
Mm-hmm.
metal that you'll need, especially with these new AI PCs from Microsoft. And so there's a significant gap in their ecosystem. And I think one other thing to consider with Google, and we saw this issue this week where somebody searched for a recipe with pizza, and I share this on social media, and Google recommended using sticky glue, and it's from 11 years ago from somebody that posted on Reddit, right? And so their shift even into generative AI search, they're going to need to spend some time to get that right because that's such a significant
Yeah.
portion of their business. And
Right.
so Google, if you're thinking Google is ready, they're not. They'll need more time to get there, and I'm sure they will, right? Apple, on the other hand, we saw amazing devices. In fact, I was just thinking their last iPad event a few weeks ago, that was their best iPad yet. It's smaller than the iPod Nano from back in the day. That's how thin these
Mm-hmm.
devices are. It's
Mm-hmm.
overclocked, it's powerful. Apple does hardware really well. And this is coming from somebody that I've exclusively used Apple devices both professionally and personally for the better part of the last 2 decades, right? So I've been
Mm-hmm.
following them. I love their products. But I do appreciate that their devices are probably overpowered for what they can do. So, an iPad, as an example, has always been limited by the operating system, not the device itself. And so Apple has been really slow to say, hey, we're going to cannibalize our Mac operating system. So we want this to be the functionality of the iPad. And so I think for them to compete, they're going to need to really make some major changes to their operating systems. We saw with Microsoft that they're going to be building AI and embedding it directly into the platform. It will be able to see what you're working on the screen. It will be able to access your data, take screenshots, and with this new recall feature. And so Apple will have tough decisions to make in terms of how they want to compete. But the biggest challenge for Apple is that they're not a hyperscaler. They don't have the infrastructure like a Google or an AWS or an Azure to serve up these large language models. And so they're going to have to rely on a third party. Maybe it's going to be OpenAI, maybe it's going to be Google. And that's going to be interesting in terms of data, privacy, and access, which Apple is so particular about. They also don't have a search engine. And again, in the past, they have relied on Google. And so here again, they're going to need to rely on another platform or build their own. And each time they rely on a third party, it's one other piece of the puzzle that they don't provide, and that data is being captured by somebody else. And we know the big opportunity with AI is access to data, especially the cohesive data stack. And so what Microsoft offers, they're saying, hey, your PC that you're working from is going to have Copilot. And that same Copilot is going to be in your workspace in the cloud. And that same Copilot is going to be on your personal devices. And it's going to be
Mm-hmm.
in this ecosystem stack. And so if you're building and you want an AI that is truly intelligent, that understands your context, both from your personal life to your professional life, this is going to be that platform for the future that can give you that. And because we control so many parts of the stack, we can guarantee the privacy. It's going to stay within the Microsoft ecosystem. We're not sending anything out. So it's just fascinating looking at where they are. And with WWDC coming up next month, I think Apple will be under a lot of pressure to deliver not just hardware, which we know they will, but they'll need to make some significant changes to their software and potentially make announcements as to how they're going to be building towards getting that infrastructure that will help them to seriously compete.
So I have a slightly different point of view. I actually think Apple has an advantage in the fact that they're actually hardware specialists.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that they know something that a lot of these other companies don't know, and that their DNA is in hardware. They know how to make stuff. They
Mm-hmm.
know how to make stuff well. If you speak to any engineer, you'll know immediately whether these are hardware or software people, right? Software people have this kind of endless optimism about how to make stuff and how to fix stuff. And if it's broken, no problem, we'll just roll it
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
Whereas hardware people have a much more frontier tech type attitude, which is, look, we got to get this right. This stuff is hard. Making this stuff is hard. Maintaining it is hard. There is a significant cost to maintaining and keeping that thing live and working. And software just doesn't have that same kind of DNA. That's not to say DNA software, your hardware people and your software people are less smart or better than
Yeah.
each other. They're just different. And I think the reason why I'm mentioning this is that it's a nice lead into what I want to talk about, and that is we're seeing a significant investment in infrastructure. We're seeing a significant investment in hardware, but we're not necessarily clear on who's going to pay for that. We mentioned this last week as well, and that is the money is just not adding up for me. Yeah, these companies are having incredible results. NVIDIA's results this week were mega.
Yeah.
The concern I have is there's no underlying fundamentals to support that. This is
Yeah.
almost entirely hype. There is about $20 to $25 billion of revenue coming out of the AI space right now. That is revenue from AI applications or infrastructure or chip manufacturing. Okay, that's the revenue. But the valuations are in the 2 point something trillion dollar range. That's a multiple that doesn't make sense to me. I mean, I've been a business owner most of my life. Those kinds of numbers didn't make sense 20 years ago. They don't make sense today. And so for me, the two questions are who is going to pay for this stuff and who is going to understand it? And there is a potential here, and this is being very speculative, and I hope one day we can come back to this episode and see whether I was right or not. But there's a potential here that we are at the top of this hype cycle, that we're going to have a bubble in AI. That bubble will pop. We will also then start to see the people who really understand hardware coming in and saying, great, now we're going to get some really good deals on this stuff. Because I would not like to be going out and buying chips right now. I think they're overvalued, they're overpriced, and they don't really have a significant path to revenue. So if I was Apple, I'd be playing a waiting game. I'd say, well, yeah, maybe we can use partners in the interim, but we really do need to build our own infrastructure if this is going to work. And if we're going to do that, then the best time to buy is when the bubble pops.
Sure. Okay.
Could be now, it could be later. I don't know when it's going to happen, but that's me trying to channel what the executive team at Apple is trying to think about right now.
All right. Fair. So here's my response. I agree with you. The question needs to be asked, who is going to pay for this? And this is where I think Microsoft is in an even better position than Apple, because the business use case for AI has already been made.
I disagree. I'd say in some cases that could be considered true because there are some people paying for it. But I just don't see enough people paying for it right now to make the assumption that all businesses are going to benefit from this. I think there are some businesses that definitely are, but there are 27 million small businesses that have no idea how AI is going to affect them. And they have no idea how to use it right now.
Well, let me rephrase it, because I think we're actually on the same page with this. I think a business is more likely to pay for an AI solution than a consumer right now. Because for a business, potentially, it can be data analysis, synthesis, optimization of processes. So when I say the business case for AI, like Microsoft is in a position because they're speaking to businesses primarily, right? Apple, on the other hand, is speaking to a lot of consumers, and consumers in the sense that you're using your Apple devices mostly, a lot for professional uses, of course, but they're the kings when it comes to like the everyday person using their iPhones and their Macs. And so last night I said to someone, would you pay for ChatGPT outside of the business use cases that you have? Or would you just use the free version? And almost everyone was like, yeah, they wouldn't, right? And I think when Apple says, okay, we're going to partner with OpenAI is going to charge Apple a significant amount of money to send those API requests. And so is Apple going to foot that bill, or are they going to say to the consumer, hey, if you want to use AI solutions, you're going to have to pay us a new iCloud subscription. We'll take a cut and we'll send the rest to OpenAI. I don't know.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong though, but if I'm using ChatGPT's app on the Apple device on my smartphone, then Apple's getting 30% of that revenue. So
no, Apple is not. Apple
it's in the App Store.
It's in the App Store, but you cannot, unless you signed up for ChatGPT inside of your Apple account, your app, Apple gets none. And OpenAI does not do that, right? They have you sign up and everything online, and then you just simply use it. And so Apple is kind of locked out of their own devices from like subscription standpoint here. It's a really interesting position. Back in the day, even with search, Google would be paying Apple to be on their phones as the search provider. Now, Apple will
Right.
need to be going to Google to say, hey, can we use your indexing of the web to power data in our models? And so I do think Apple will ultimately have to build out this infrastructure, build out this tooling. But from a numbers standpoint, Microsoft is triple dipping. Think about it. Microsoft provides a hyperscale infrastructure for GPT and Copilot. So
Hmm.
they're making money on that side. Then when you build your toolings with these products, they're making money from the developers and the companies that are renting their infrastructure. And then they have their devices that people are subscribing to Microsoft 365. They're buying their AI Copilot Plus species. And so
Hmm.
they're making money at all of these different levels versus Apple. I think they're in the same position that Meta is in. Meta invested a lot in Llama 3 and all these AI models, but the market said, whoa, hold on a second. How does this actually put money back into you as a company? Like, we
Yeah.
love the tech, but there's no money here as yet. And I think Meta will eventually figure out a path to like revenue and profitability here. And Apple will also. Like, Apple will take the time to figure out how to present this to consumers where it's fascinating and magical and it's integrated into the device where people want to use it. But for now, I do think they're going to be struggling to keep pace with
Yeah. And
Meta.
we've seen this movie before, like, especially if you've been around the block and you're old enough to remember kind of late 90s and the
Yep.
early 2000s, the kind of the advancements that were made in infrastructure. If you think about where the money went, right? The dot com is a really good model for understanding. So, assuming that you're listening to this and you've not been through a dot com type experience, one of the things to understand or to you go back and research is that there was a lot of hype around the potential for consumer. Right? There was a lot of, hey, if we dot com this, then the things that you currently do in retail or in services will be substituted for the things that you do on this dot com domain. So you can buy
Yeah.
your stuff. And there was a lot of excitement. And the valuations of those companies were put through that lens of, yes, this will ultimately replace retail, this will ultimately replace services. And very quickly it came to everybody's attention that that wasn't going to happen. Right? There was a overhyping of that. It was going to take a lot of time. I mean, if you remember this, it was more expensive to ship something from a .com to your
Yep.
home than it was just to go to the store. So a lot of these companies were spending a significant amount of money on cost of acquisition. So their CAC was high, their LTV was extremely low, and they were just kind of caught in that rock and a hard between a rock and a hard place. So the money started to shift then to the B2B. They were like, well, what if B2B was able to do this? And you got companies
Yeah.
like Tencent and Alibaba to really like, wow, this could work.
Hmm.
Like if you could replace that supply chain messiness with a lot of B2B .com-ish services, could that
Yeah.
work as well? And those companies benefited from that. But even then, there was still a lot of head scratching. It was still like, well, it's not quite there. There's a lot of hype. There's definitely this consolidation around how we're going to do things and where the infrastructure needs to be to support that. And really, the companies that were building the infrastructure were the ones that benefited the most from that
Hmm.
period. Companies like Cisco specifically did very, very well. They acquired 3M. 3M was essentially this
Hmm.
product that allowed you to get the internet into your home.
Yeah.
And I think what we're going to see is NVIDIA is part of that. NVIDIA is the current Cisco. But remember what happened to Cisco. Cisco also got overhyped and they were never able to regain that value ever again, right? They went off the edge of the cliff. And yes,
Yeah.
they did come back somewhat, but Cisco's never been quite the same. And I think that's the potential here for NVIDIA. What I'm really curious about is the companies that are taking this stuff to the edge. Coming back to the Apple B2C conversation, we are going to need these small language models. We are going to need device specific models. We're going to have to be very clear about the fact that if this is going to be a playground for B2C players, it has to be a playground that allows for the edge case. And in
Hmm.
that scenario, companies like Cloudflare, Akamai, they're interesting again because they are the ones that allow you to take that interaction and that compute experience right to the very edge, to that last device
Yeah.
that's being used. So I still stand by the fact that I think that NVIDIA is overvalued right now and that we will have to see some kind of adjustment there. And I'm also clear in my mind that Apple are no idiots. They've been
Yeah.
through this before. Like the executives at Apple were there 25 years ago. They know this movie. They know how the ending how it ends, and they are very understanding of the fact that they don't have to race to this. In fact, that's one of the things that I'm kind of curious about is they are deliberately being quiet about this
Yeah.
because they know that the B2C story hasn't played out yet. It hasn't got a lot of clarity around it. And I think if I was a betting man, I would say that they are willing to wait and see what's going to happen. And they are very good at hardware. So they also understand that people that are buying chips, like, I mean, was it last week? XAI bought
Yeah.
$8 billion worth of process of compute from
Yeah.
Oracle,
Yeah.
or
But
maybe more, 10 billion
yeah.
or something. Um, and my mind was just like, what?
Yeah.
You haven't even figured out how to make money out of your core business. Never mind out of this like fringe thing that you're doing. And you want to go and make a deal. Okay, sure, it's a multi-year deal, but you're going to do this multi-year deal with Oracle to get compute and essentially this infrastructure. And
Yeah.
I'm like, why? I don't understand. I
Okay. Okay.
like to believe that I'm somewhat of an intelligent person, but I just can't. The math just doesn't make sense to me.
The math isn't mathing. All right. Let me attempt
The
to
math isn't math. Yeah.
let me attempt to address some of your concerns. So let's summarize for the listeners what the week was like. You had the earnings for NVIDIA, and it was a blockbuster earnings report. First, they announced a 10-to-1 stock split, which any investor is going to be excited about, starting the 6th of June. A 150% increase in dividends, again, going back to investors. So that's always a good thing. But this was a double earnings beat, right? Like, think of how
Yeah.
crazy the street has been in terms of what they should expect from these companies. NVIDIA
I mean,
still
I would
beat
have
it.
I would have got excited about 40 or 50%. Double earnings is kind of ridiculous. Let's be honest.
Yes.
Like you can try and explain this to me, but you're also just placating me in the sense that like it's not real. It just doesn't make sense.
Then 260% year over year growth, 560% earnings per share.
But off a very, just let me be clear, 260% revenue growth year after year. That's also from 2022 was really the kind of the breakthrough AI stuff.
Mhm.
So we're talking about from a pretty low base. Again, going back to .com, people were saying, "Oh, we had 1,000% revenue growth." Like, yeah, off a pretty low base, off a zero base, everything looks good, right?
Sure. So here's my prediction, and here's what I'll say. Nvidia is the most valuable company in the world today. It shouldn't be Apple. Nvidia is, and the reason is, I believe chips and the infrastructure that Nvidia provides is going to be in demand for at least the next 4 to 5 years. Because if you think about it, we're rewiring the world right now for a world built on intelligence. And we're just at the starting line. We still have
I
our
don't
car.
disagree with that. What I disagree with is the availability of the companies that can afford to pay and use this and actually demand revenue from it is limited. I think we're looking at it through this lens of, yes, the Super Seven or whatever they call them, Magnificent
Mhm.
Seven, the big companies that spend all the money and essentially are like 25% of the value of Nasdaq. Those companies will continue to spend for the next initial period because they can and they've got the money and they've got this free cash flow. Where else is the money going to come from?
Okay. So the first place, governments. Right now, as we speak, you're seeing every country basically look and say, we need a sovereign AI strategy. We need to get control of our infrastructure within, and that's why you're seeing these tours by the big players to get into the Middle East, to get into Asia, to get into Europe, to say, hey, you need to build this out, come to us. And so you're going to see a massive spend in the next 12 months from all of these countries so that they can have some control, because AI it will need to be a national security priority for every country. We spoke about that last night in terms of just safety and security. And you'll see the US, you have already seen the US starting to just dial up their investments, getting more companies to do manufacturing on the ground. And they're pretty far ahead of where Europe is, etc. And so I think NVIDIA still has just this massive revenue that they can expect and interest coming from companies. But I also think as industries
Just on
evolve,
defense,
yeah,
just on
yeah,
defense. I think what we need to do is we need to look at countries that are actually at war and how they're spending money and what are they spending money to defend against.
mm,
And they're not buying technology to defend against cyber warfare. They're buying products to help them shoot stuff out of the sky.
I disagree
So
though. I
no,
do
I'm
think,
not. This is not a. You don't have to agree with me. These are just the facts. If you're either Ukraine or Israel, the
mhm.
things that you buy to shoot stuff out of the sky
Well,
cost a
yes,
lot more money than AI does.
this is true, but at the same time, you're still seeing Ukraine and other countries invest in AI technology to assist with
Well, I'm
warfare,
not saying that they're
right?
not doing that. I'm just saying that I think that do the real math. Okay, a single missile
True. Well,
that
yes,
shoots
fair.
another missile out of the sky is going to cost way more than any AI investment that they're going to make. So I think just the economics right now need to be put into perspective. Yes, I agree. We have to spend money on national security. AI is a national security thing. But what's more of a national security thing is the energy crisis, right? Is the
Hmm.
obesity crisis, is the fact that we have a healthcare crisis. I think those are things that AI would be interesting to apply against,
Of
not
course.
not the kind of supposed like cybersecurity threat.
Well, it's cybersecurity in the sense that sure, at like in actual war, you're going to spend a lot on your missiles, etc. But you're already seeing the defense programs investing a lot in automated drones and better control over
Hardware, drones, hardware.
hardware powered by AI that needs
Yeah,
infrastructure like an
but
NVIDIA chip.
hardware nevertheless. Like a drone is still a drone, and you have to
True.
shoot it out of the sky.
But you're also seeing like the amount of attacks that the US is defending against in terms of cybersecurity on a daily basis has gone up so much. And so I can't belabor the point too much, but I do think you're going to see this shift away from even just physical warfare in a lot of cases to cyber warfare, where it's like, how do you take down an energy grid? How do you disrupt the financial markets? And you're going to have this defenders versus adversary conversation for the time being. To your point, when you think of the energy grid and how we optimize for that, guess what that solution is going to be powered by AI. When you think of drug discovery, what is that going to be powered by AI? And you're seeing this shift because a
Well,
lot
hang
of
on a second. You were hearing that from the people who are making the chips. So when NVIDIA's CEO gets up and says, "Hey, the biggest breakthrough in healthcare is AI," whose benefit is that? It's to
true,
his. He's coming out of his mouth. He is not a healthcare expert.
true.
He doesn't know how the healthcare system works. And yes, I do believe that there is a significant amount of truth in that. But when will that happen? I don't know if you know anybody who works in a hospital. Just thinking, maybe it's your wife, but things move really, really slow in healthcare. And
This
so
is true.
just saying AI is going to create breakthroughs, these things also still have to go through the normal regulation, the FDA approval. A drug does not get to market in under 10 years. It's just the way it is. It still needs 10 years after that in situ, just like uh, um, the Ozempic and all the other GLP-1 drugs. Those drugs have already been in the market for 18 years being used by diabetics. Now they're being used for a completely different usage, which is weight loss. But that's like a 30-year or 40-year cycle,
But we
right?
don't
This
have
is,
that time, Richard. We can't say because that has been the way it has been done in the past. We need to give ourselves that same ramp up, right? Like we're in this exponential age right now with a technology that
mm,
can potentially help us to discover things faster. And maybe there's an opportunity. I'll be
yeah,
optimistic that there's an
yeah.
opportunity for us to
No, I don't
accelerate
disagree with
the
you.
timeline.
I don't disagree with you that there's an optimistic viewpoint in this. I think what the realism is that there is a difference between the companies that are spending money on chips. If you're XAI, and you go out and spend $10 billion on chips right now, or process, whatever the compute that you're buying from Oracle, the time that it's going to take you to earn that back in revenue is significant. That's what I'm saying. You can complain all you want
True.
about the fact that, there are diseases that need to be taken care of and wars that need to be ended. It's still going to take 10, 20 years for that environment, that infrastructure that we're talking about, those processes to change. I don't care how fast your AI is. I don't care how fast your chip is. What I'm trying to point out is that the companies that are currently selling these chips, like NVIDIA, and making a lot of money, they're selling them to companies that still have to go and make something or create some kind of solution that has to get paid for. I just don't see where that's going to happen in the next year. It's not going to happen. It's
True.
unlikely. So it's probably going to take 5-10 years for those AI benefits to be seen. And in that time, a lot of companies can go bankrupt. A lot of companies that made commitments to the
Fair.
Microsofts and the Oracles and the NVIDIAs like, oh, I'm sorry. I know we promised you $10 billion, but we actually can't pay you right now.
Fair. Fair. I can't disagree with that. I do think we need a more realistic timeline. It's not going to happen. I'm 100% in agreement. This isn't a 1 year timeline. The time horizon for a lot of this technology is maybe 5 to 10 years. But I do think when it comes to where NVIDIA is, if you're looking at an Apple today and you're like, oh, this company should be worth 2 point something trillion dollars. Are they 3 trillion as yet? They might be 3 trillion. I don't remember. But Apple is
As
the most
close to
valuable.
as possible. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, they're the most valuable company in the world. And in terms of what that opportunity is for Apple, I'm thinking, how many more devices can they sell, right? Sure, they have pivoted into services and they're doing really well there. But when you think of the potential for chips, I'm not saying they're not trading at multiples above what they're worth, but I can see why an Nvidia and companies like that should demand the value that they are today. Now, with that said, we're starting to also see consolidation with acquisitions already happening. We're seeing companies go out of business. We've seen major players like Inflection. They pretty much got semi-acquired, but this week they announced a new team. But I want to kind of highlight some of these numbers that we're seeing in terms of investments, because you're right, it does feel very bubblish, right? Scale AI announced a $1 billion Series F. Now, Scale AI is an interesting company, especially for the AI space, because they provide a lot of the data infrastructure that companies use to manage these AI models. And so it's not a young company. They're around 8 years old, and I think the series is kind of at this point where they'll probably go public soon and try to get an exit. You saw Suno raise 125 million, and it's a completely different landscape than 5 years ago, right? Where by the time a company goes public, they're going to be like hundreds of $1 billion in market cap, and you wonder like
Yeah.
what is the point at that point, right?
So the question that needs to be asked is maybe less, are they raising a lot of money? And more is, what are they raising the money for? So
Mm,
in the past, if I raised $100 million for a startup, a lot of that money uh, stayed within the organization to pay for talent and operations, product discovery,
yeah,
actual product development. Probably in the range, depending on what you were doing, anything from 15 to 30% of that money was going to be going to some of the infrastructure players, the AWSs and people like
yeah,
that. And that was great because my one of the first startups that I was involved in, we raised $17 million, and almost all of that money had to go into buying servers. We literally had to make our own server farm.
yeah.
Like that, this was like the old days when you literally had to build
Your
a,
own.
a like a
The rack.
basement full of racks, right, with air conditioners and all kinds of things. And so when AWS came along and all these other cloud services, you were really kind of excited about that because you were able
Yeah,
to redirect your $100 million or whatever you had raised to the things that you needed to. Now we're seeing companies raise a ton of money, but almost all of that money is going back
yep,
to infrastructure. Like
yep.
again, there's a lot of parallels to this kind of age of when we were creating the .com, when we were essentially building the infrastructure and the underlying foundations for the internet. If you're if you're again, I'm just going to pick on them for a second. If you're raising, I don't know how much they've raised, but it's less than $10 billion.
Yeah.
Or I don't think they've raised the money yet, but they've promised that they're going to raise a certain amount of money. Good,
Billion. Yeah.
8 billion. They've committed more to spending on infrastructure with Oracle than they have raised money.
Yeah.
Again, it's not about, hey, are these valuations too much? It's about what's going to happen downstream. Where will the revenue come from to actually justify that? Or why is all that money going straight back to the Magnificent Seven? Like
Sure.
all the money gets raised by the like A16Z, Sequoia, General Catalyst, all these big players in the VC space.
Just going
Uh,
back.
Yep. And then the irony is, of course, well, I don't know if it's irony, but the thing to be aware of is that Microsoft is the biggest investor in AI right now.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, they've invested more money than all of the other VCs in the AI space combined.
100%.
So the funny thing is, they're writing checks knowing 100% sure that that money is going straight back to them.
Exactly. It's brilliant. I can't stress how polar position Microsoft is in right now.
Yeah,
This is brilliant for them. So a couple of things I'll say. I think historically we have seen precedent for a lot of spend on like capital expenditure on like infrastructure for even during the railroads era, right? Or when it was building out the internet. So I can see where the argument could be made to say, hey, we're building the foundation for this future intelligent society, and it requires us to do this investment today, right? But I agree with you. I do think we'll have to be very careful. But what's so interesting, the reason I look at where Apple is not just based on what they have done, but what they have not done. This
right.
week, we saw Microsoft announce, hey, we're going to be partnering with Cognition Labs and their Devin AI engineer. We're going to bring
Yeah.
that to developers. And so
Mm-hmm.
you're seeing that Microsoft is maybe 2 or 3 steps ahead of their competitors in thinking of what's coming next and the acquisitions that they need to make. And I'm saying, well, why didn't Google reach out to Cognition? Why didn't an Apple reach out to say, how can we bring this technology to our SDKs and for our developers? It just seems that Microsoft is being a lot more aggressive in terms of identifying talent and getting that talent on their side of the fence.
Mm-hmm.
Apple, I'm sure, has
Well,
some
because they've
strategy.
got the economics to do that. They can pay
Yep.
the higher salaries, they can pay these acqui-hires, they can actually make the acquisitions because they know that that money is going to come straight back to them. I don't think the same can be said of Apple or Google. It's just a little harder to see how that cash flow runs back into the business.
Exactly. And the other thing for Apple, I think they have been distracted. They got distracted with the self-driving car that they ended up just cutting. They got distracted, I think, with Apple Vision Pro. It's just it was so over exactly. Apparently, Humane AI Pin is now looking for a buyer, and
Oh, of course. Yeah.
that didn't take long, right? And so I think Apple really needs to shift focus because this new AI wave caught them by surprise. I honestly think that. I
Yeah.
don't think they expected people to react to ChatGPT as well as they did and that interest to be there and for this uptick in terms of the opportunity for AI. But again,
Mm-hmm.
they'll take their time to do it right. We can't count Apple out. And I'm excited for WWDC. Next month, I'm sure they're going to amaze me with some of their hardware announcements. But big picture is what I'm looking at. There was a comment this week about bloatware in
Mm.
technology. And I was expressing how little of our devices we actually use in terms of its functionality and capabilities. And I think we're at this point now where a lot of people will be thinking, do I need another Mac computer? Do I need a better phone? Or
Yeah.
are
This is
we
what
at
we
least
talked about this last week about the substitution effect. Is like when you buy something, you end up with keeping the old thing, and now you've got the new thing, and now you've got like a
exactly?
smartphone, an iPad, a MacBook. I've got a mini Pro. I mean, I got all these things, and like the question is, could I just have one thing? And really, is that just my phone? Like,
What is it?
yeah.
So overall, I think it was an amazing week for AI. I thought some of the stories were super interesting in terms of the acquisitions, some of the new technologies that we saw from Adobe. Adobe released some new AI features in Lightroom. We saw some new music making capabilities. So again, the AI crowd marches on. The progress keeps on going forward, and it's another week. So I hope today's discussion was helpful. Richard, any last thoughts, any comments, anything happening that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I think just you know, I am an optimist. I'm naturally an optimist. I've always been an optimist, and I always will. But I think if you're in the space where you are looking to invest in AI, like when you look at NVIDIA and you go, "Oh my God, this is like the next rocket ship." Just as a reminder, is that we've seen this kind of thing play out before. This is
Hmm.
not new. Certainly not new for me, and I'm not even that old. I'll only be 54 this year. Seen it a few times. We saw it more recently with like some of the meme stocks.
Yeah,
I think just a word of caution to people who are optimists about AI. You don't necessarily have to be optimists about the stock market, but
yeah,
I am optimistic about the technology. I am currently working with two companies where we are implementing AI into the product. It is very useful. It is highly valuable to the
yeah,
end user, to the customer. It's difficult to make this stuff work. It's not easy. That's another thing to be considerate of is that AI as a technology is cool, and the kind of Chat GPT experience makes you feel like it's very simple. It's
yeah,
not. To implement that in a existing stack, to build a platform in which customers can actually use it in a B2B environment, make sure it's secure, make sure that it's safe, make sure that its data has integrity and that it's not leaking all over the place. A lot of these things are difficult. So I'm an optimist about the technology. I love, our focus that you and I have created on being AI literate, understanding
yeah,
it better. But I want people to understand that just because you're optimistic about a technology does not mean you have to be optimistic about the company that sells that technology or sells
yeah,
the infrastructure of that technology. I think those two are completely different considerations. And just be aware, buyer beware. Like,
yeah. I love that.
think very carefully about the fundamentals. Look at this. I'm excited that Nvidia went through the roof because I hold stock, and I'm not really I'm not an accredited investor, and this is not investing advice. But I'm glad to see that my stocks are doing well. Um, but I'm also realistic. I've also ridden the wave with Amazon. I've ridden the wave with Tesla.
Yeah,
I've ridden
yeah.
the wave with Microsoft. I've been up and down, for 20 something years writing this story. So just be aware.
I love that. So I'll add to that. Our focus on literacy is key, I believe, at this moment that we are in our history. And if you're looking to learn about AI, if you're looking to stay up to date on AI, go to Maginative.com. It will cover the most important stories for you
Mm-hmm.
every week. You can subscribe to the newsletter. We'll send you a personal email at the end of the week with just a digest of all the top stories. You can subscribe to us on YouTube or your favorite podcast to participate and hear amazing conversations. Just analyzing the stories, providing context as to how it fits into your daily life, the broader picture for society. If you're a company looking to invest in AI and you're wondering, okay, what are the questions we should be asking? We do provide advisory services, and we're going to be doing some training sessions this summer coming out. So stay tuned for more information on that. But we're on this massive mission to educate the world around AI. We want more people participating in the conversation. We think getting more voices in the development of this technology is going to be key. So thank
Mm-hmm.
you for your support. Please help spread the word. We love the support that we have been getting from you guys, and that gets us excited to come out every week to do more. So with that, as we always say, one love.
Bye.